Sands Hotel, Copa Room, Las Vegas, October 1963. The stage crew had been working since 4 p.m. It was now 8:47. They'd hung the lights, tested the microphone, set up the drum kit exactly where the writer specified, 6 feet from center stage, angled 15 degrees left. The piano was tuned. The chairs for the orchestra were arranged in a semicircle, 23 music stands, each with a small lamp clipped to the top. The rehearsal was scheduled for 9 p.m. Frank Sinatra was supposed to walk through the opening number. Just once. Make sure the sound was right, the lights hit at the correct angles, the orchestra knew the tempo changes. Then they'd break for the night and do the real show tomorrow. That's what the production schedule said. But at 8:47, Frank Sinatra was still in his suite upstairs. And standing on the stage looking at his watch was a man named Robert Maheu. Maheu was 46 years old, former FBI agent, private investigator. He worked for Howard Hughes now, handling situations that required discretion. He was good at his job. He knew how to talk to people, how to negotiate, how to make problems disappear quietly. Tonight, he had a problem. The problem was that Howard Hughes wanted Frank Sinatra to perform at a private party 3 weeks from now. Beverly Hills, exclusive guest list. Hughes was willing to pay $50,000 for 90 minutes. Sinatra had said no, not through his agent, not through his manager. He'd said no directly to Maheu in a phone call that lasted 45 seconds. Not interested, Mr. Sinatra. Mr. Hughes is prepared to. I said no. Click, that was 2 weeks ago. Hughes had sent Maheu back. Make it happen. So now Maheu stood on the stage of the Copa Room, waiting for Frank Sinatra to come down for a rehearsal, hoping he could catch him before the band arrived and have a conversation. A real conversation. One where he could explain that Hughes wasn't asking anymore. He was insisting. At 8:52, the stage door opened. But it wasn't Sinatra, it was Bill Miller, Sinatra's pianist. He was carrying a briefcase and a cup of coffee. He saw Maheu standing alone on the stage and stopped. Help you? Miller asked. I'm waiting for Frank. You have an appointment. Not exactly. Miller set his briefcase down next to the piano bench. He studied Maheu for a moment. Gray suit, thin tie, shoes polished but not expensive, the look of a man who worked for someone else. What's your name? Robert Maheu. Miller's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind his eyes. He'd heard the name before. You work for Hughes. That's right. Frank, know you're here. Not yet. Miller sat down at the piano, didn't open the briefcase, just sat there, hands resting on his knees. Then you should probably leave, Miller said quietly. I need 5 minutes with him. You're not gonna get 5 minutes. Mr. Hughes is willing to. Doesn't matter what Hughes is willing to do, Miller interrupted. Frank said no. That means no. Maheu took a step closer. His voice stayed calm, professional. I understand, Mr. Sinatra's position, but Mr. Hughes feels there may have been a misunderstanding. He's prepared to increase the offer. 75,000, 2 songs, 30 minutes, that's it. Miller looked at him for a long moment. Then he stood and picked up his briefcase. I'm gonna tell you something, Miller said, and you should listen carefully, because if you're still here when Frank walks in, this conversation is gonna go very differently. Maheu waited. Frank doesn't care about your offer, Miller continued. He doesn't care if Hughes doubles it, triples it. He said no because he doesn't want to do it. And when Frank doesn't want to do something, the amount of money you throw at him doesn't change his mind. It just pisses him off. Mr. Miller, I'm not trying to. Yes, you are, Miller said. You're trying to corner him. You're here before rehearsal, before his guys get here, thinking you can catch him alone and talk him into it. That's a mistake. I'm just doing my job. So am I, and my job is to tell you that if you push this, Frank is gonna remember. And you don't want Frank to remember. Maheu's jaw tightened. He'd been threatened before, by mobsters, by politicians, by people who actually had the power to hurt him. He knew the difference between real threats and empty ones. I appreciate the advice, Maheu said carefully, but Mr. Hughes is not a man who takes no for an answer. Then Mr. Hughes is gonna be disappointed. The stage door opened again. This time it was Sinatra. He was wearing dark slacks and a white shirt, sleeves rolled to the elbows, no tie, no jacket. He was carrying a glass of bourbon. He walked onto the stage and saw Miller standing near the piano. Then he saw Maheu. He stopped. For 3 seconds, nobody moved. Then Sinatra walked to the microphone stand, set his drink down on the stage floor, adjusted the mic with one hand. Bill, he said without looking at Miller. Who's this? Robert Maheu, works for Howard Hughes. Sinatra nodded slowly. Then he looked at Matthew directly for the first time. "You're the guy who called me 2 weeks ago." "Yes, sir. I told you no." "You did. So why are you here?" Matthew had prepared for this. He'd rehearsed the conversation in his head on the flight from Los Angeles. He knew what to say, how to say it. He knew how to handle difficult personalities. He'd negotiated with senators, with union bosses, with men who didn't like being told what to do. But standing on that stage with Frank Sinatra looking at him like he was something that had wandered in off the street, Matthew felt the script disappear. "Mr. Hughes asked me to speak with you again," Matthew said. "He feels there may have been a miscommunication. He's prepared to increase the offer significantly. $75,000 for 30 minutes. 2 songs of your choice. You select the venue. You select the time. Complete creative control." Sinatra picked up his bourbon, took a sip, set it back down. "Did you hear me say no the first time?" "I did." "Did it sound like I was confused?" "No, sir." "Did it sound like I needed time to think about it?" "No, sir." "So what makes you think I changed my mind?" Matthew took a breath. This was the moment. This was where he either made the sale or walked away. "Because Mr. Hughes is a very powerful man," Matthew said carefully, "and he has resources that could be beneficial to you. Business relationships, investments, connections. He's not just offering money. He's offering a partnership." Sinatra stared at him. Then he looked at Miller. "Bill, what time is it?" Miller glanced at his watch. 8:56. "Band gets here at 9. "Yes." Sinatra turned back to Matthew. "You've got 4 minutes. Say what you came to say." Matthew felt his pulse quicken. He had an opening, not a big one, but enough. "Mr. Hughes admires you," Matthew said. "He thinks you're the greatest entertainer in the world. He wants to host an event that people will remember, something exclusive, historic, and he wants you to be the centerpiece." "Who's on the guest list?" "That's confidential." "Then I'm not interested." "Mr. Sinatra, I don't perform for people I don't know," Sinatra said. His voice was still calm, still controlled, but something underneath had shifted. "I don't care how much money you're offering. I don't care what connections Hughes has. I don't perform in private for people who want to use my name to impress their friends." "It's not about impressing anyone. It's always about impressing someone," Sinatra interrupted. "Hughes wants me there so he can show his guests that he's the kind of guy who can get Frank Sinatra to sing at his party. That's what this is. That's what it's always been." Matthew opened his mouth to respond, but Sinatra raised one hand. Not aggressive, just, "Stop. Let me tell you something about Howard Hughes," Sinatra said quietly. "I know who he is. I know what he does. I know he buys casinos and politicians and movie studios and thinks that means he can buy people. But he can't buy me, because I don't need his money. I don't need his connections, and I sure as hell don't need his approval. Mr. Sinatra, with all due respect." "I'm not finished," Sinatra said. His voice hadn't gotten louder, but it had gotten colder. "You came here tonight thinking you could catch me before rehearsal, thinking maybe I'd be more flexible if you caught me off guard. That's smart. That's good strategy. But here's the problem. I don't like people showing up uninvited. I don't like people ambushing me. And I really don't like people who think they can pressure me into doing something I already said no to." The stage door opened again. 3 musicians walked in. Trumpet, bass, drums. They saw Sinatra standing at the microphone. They saw Matthew. They stopped. Sinatra didn't look at them. He kept his eyes on Matthew. "You've got 2 choices," Sinatra said. "You can walk out of here right now, go back to Hughes, and tell him I said no again. Or you can stay, and I'll tell you exactly what I think of people who don't respect the word no. In front of my band, in front of everyone." Matthew felt his face flush. He'd been in tense situations before, but this was different. This wasn't a negotiation anymore. This was a statement. "Mr. Sinatra," Matthew said, and his voice was steady but quieter now. "I'm just trying to do my job." "I understand," Sinatra said, "but your job is to make me say yes. And my job is to tell you that's never gonna happen. So now you've got to decide if you want to keep pushing, or if you want to walk away while you still can." The musicians were still standing by the door, frozen, waiting. Matthew looked at Miller. Miller's face was expressionless. Then Matthew looked back at Sinatra. "I'll tell Mr. Hughes you declined," Matthew said quietly. "You do that." Matthew walked off the stage, past the musicians, out the door. It closed behind him with a soft click. For a moment nobody moved. Then Sinatra picked up his bourbon and drained it in one swallow, set the empty glass down on the stage floor. "All right," he said to the musician. "Let's get started." Bill Miller sat at the piano. The other musicians took their position. Within 2 minutes, the stage was alive with sound. Trumpet warming up, bass tuning, drums tapping out rhythm. At 9:03, the rest of the orchestra arrived. They saw Sinatra already at the mic, already running through vocal scale. They took their seats quickly. No question, no chatter. Nelson Riddle walked in at 9:05 with the charts. He saw the energy in the room, tight, focused, something electric underneath, and he knew something had happened. He didn't ask. He just raised his baton. They rehearsed for 90 minutes. Sinatra ran through 6 songs. He didn't stop between numbers, didn't give notes, just sang. When he hit a phrase wrong, he'd shake his head once and the band would loop back 8 bars and he'd hit it again. By 10:30, they were done. Sinatra thanked the band, told them they sounded great, said he'd see them tomorrow night. Then he walked off stage with Miller. In the hallway backstage, Miller finally spoke. That was close. Sinatra looked at him. Close to what? Close to you losing your temper. Sinatra smiled slightly. I didn't lose my temper. You wanted to. Yeah, Sinatra admitted. I did. They walked in silence for a moment. Then Miller said, You think he'll come back? No. You sure? Yeah. Why? Sinatra stopped walking, looked at Miller directly. Because I gave him an out, Sinatra said. I could have embarrassed him in front of the band, could have made it ugly, but I gave him a chance to walk away clean. That's the smart play. Why? Because now he goes back to Hughes and says Frank Sinatra is unreasonable, difficult, not worth the trouble, and Hughes moves on. But if I'd embarrassed him, if I'd made him look weak, he would have had to come back, had to prove something, and then it gets messy. Miller thought about that. So you let him save face. I let him leave, Sinatra corrected. That's different. How? Sinatra started walking again. Saving face means you give someone a reason to feel good about losing. I didn't do that. I just gave him a reason to stop. They reached the elevator. Sinatra pressed the button. You think Hughes will let it go? Miller asked. Sinatra shrugged. Doesn't matter if he does or doesn't. I said no. That's the end of it. The elevator doors opened. Sinatra stepped in. Miller followed. As the doors closed, Miller said, You know Hughes is gonna be pissed. Let him be pissed. He's got a lot of power in this town. So do I. The elevator rose in silence. When it reached the penthouse floor, the doors opened. Sinatra stepped out. Miller stayed inside. Bill, Sinatra said, turning back, you did good tonight, warning that guy off before I got there. Miller nodded. Didn't help much. That helped enough. The doors closed. Robert Maheu flew back to Los Angeles the next morning. He went directly to Howard Hughes's offices. Hughes was waiting. Well, Hughes asked. Maheu set his briefcase down carefully. He said no. I know he said no. That's why I sent you back. He's not going to change his mind. Hughes stared at him. Did you explain the offer? 75,000, 30 minutes. I explained everything. And he told me to leave. Hughes was silent for a long moment. Then he leaned back in his chair. His face was unreadable. What did he say exactly? Maheu hesitated. Then, he said he doesn't perform for people he doesn't know, and he doesn't appreciate being pressured. Pressured, Hughes repeated. Yes, sir. Hughes turned and looked out the window. Las Vegas sprawled below, casinos, hotels, neon lights beginning to glow in the late afternoon sun. Do you know how many people I've made with a phone call? Hughes asked quietly. Yes, sir. Do you know how many careers I've built? How many favors I'm owed in this town? Yes, sir. And Frank Sinatra thinks he can just say no. Maheu didn't respond. Hughes turned back to face him. What do you think? About what, sir? About Sinatra. You met him, you talked to him, what's your assessment? Maheu thought carefully. He'd worked for Hughes for 3 years. He knew when to be honest and when to soften the truth. I think, Maheu said slowly, that Frank Sinatra understands power better than most people. Meaning? Meaning he knows that saying no to you makes him more valuable, not less. Hughes stared at him. Explain. Everyone says yes to you, Mr. Hughes. You're used to it, you expect it. But when someone says no, really says no, without negotiation, without fear, it makes them rare. And rare things are valuable. Hughes was quiet for a long time. So I made him more powerful by offering him money. Yes, sir. And if I push harder, I make him even more powerful. Yes, sir. Hughes smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. That's clever. He's a clever man. Hughes stood, walked to the window again, looked out at Las Vegas. Forget the party, he said finally. Find someone else. Yes, sir. And Bob? Yes. Don't contact Sinatra again, ever. Understood? Mayhew picked up his briefcase and left. The story spread quietly through Las Vegas, through the casino lounges and hotel bars and backstage corridor. Frank Sinatra had turned down $75,000 from Howard Hughes, twice. Some people thought he was crazy. Others understood. They understood that in a town where everyone had a price, being the guy who didn't make you untouchable. They understood that power wasn't about how much money you had. It was about how little you needed. Years later, Bill Miller described dealing with Frank that night as negotiating with a wall. Hughes's side relied on money and connections for leverage, but since Frank already had those, they held no power over him. Miller clarified that Frank wasn't mean, which makes people feel small, but simply clear. He drew a line without apology. Most eventually realized they had no leverage and stopped pushing. The ones who didn't were the ones who got hurt. When you have enough power that you can say no to $75,000 without blinking, and the man offering it walks away quietly, are you protecting your dignity? Or are you proving that you have more power than him and making sure everyone in the room knows it? And when the story spreads through Vegas and people start calling you the man who told Howard Hughes no, is that respect? Or is that fear dressed up as admiration? Because there's a difference between being untouchable and being unreachable. And Frank Sinatra understood that difference better than anyone.